Now on BBC One, as the Queen's coffin arrives to London, live coverage of the eve of the procession to lying in state.
Buckingham Palace, the monarch's official residence in London, and until 5 days ago, the undisputed domain of Her Majesty Elizabeth II. Her death last week means that this is now the official home of King Charles III, but the late Queen will make one final visit to her old residence before the state funeral takes place next Monday. Outside the palace, in the surrounding streets and parks, and at royal residences in other parts of the UK, a tide of flowers and messages and gifts, all of them a vibrant illustration of the nation's affection and deep respect for Her late Majesty. Now here in central London, many of the tributes have been moved, there are so many of them, into nearby Green Park as the final preparations are made for the days to come. And I have to say, the air in this part of the city is heavily scented by thousands of the tributes as people from all parts of the UK and overseas come to pay their respects in person. Hundreds of miles away from here in the city of Edinburgh, it's been a period of 24 hours that few will ever forget. Thousands of people gathered to see the silent royal procession to St Giles Cathedral, and then they queued patiently throughout the night for their opportunity to file past Her Majesty's coffin. It's been an immense display of respect and affection ahead of the time for the late Queen's body to be taken to London. So this evening, Queen's coffin will be flown from Edinburgh to London. It's on its way. A final journey from the Palace of Holyrood House to Buckingham Palace ahead of the solemn procession to Westminster tomorrow afternoon, along the Mall, familiar route, the great ceremonial route to Whitehall and to the Palace of Westminster. And there, in line with tradition, the late sovereign's body will lie in state in the calm space of Westminster Hall in the days ahead of the state funeral itself. Now, that journey began earlier this evening at Edinburgh when the Queen's coffin, which was accompanied by her daughter, the Princess Royal, was flown south to Edinburgh, from Edinburgh to London. And the royal aircraft is expected to arrive at RAF Northolt on the western fringe of London at any moment. Her late Majesty will then make that final approach to the capital and will lie at rest overnight in the Bow Room, which is a room overlooking the wonderful gardens behind the palace at Buckingham Palace itself. Now, my colleague Sonali Shah is at RAF Northolt waiting for the arrival of the royal aircraft, and Sonali can bring us up to date on the timings and what we can expect there. Sonali.
Hugh, welcome to RAF Northolt, an airfield that is older than the Royal Air Force itself, a station that Her Majesty the Queen was very familiar with throughout her reign. She flew to Balmoral from here over the summer. Now, of course, everyone stationed here has been preparing for this for years. Over the past few days, things have been extremely busy here on a practical sense. But speaking to those who work here this afternoon, it has become really clear. I've really begun to understand just how deeply personal today is from them. On top of that sense of duty, there has been emotion, but they're also driven. There is a lot of passion here to get things right for Her Majesty. The Prime Minister and other dignitaries are in position, as is the Guard of Honour formed by the Queen's Colour Squadron, the ceremonial arm of the RAF, as Her Majesty the Queen returns for one final time.
Sonali, thank you very much. We'll be back at RAF Northolt, of course, as soon as there's any suggestion that the Royal aircraft is going to land. And we'll see then the Guard of Honour and indeed the welcoming party that's all in place, ready to go to accompany the Queen's body back into central London itself. I should say that the former Prince of Wales, now King Charles III, has already returned to Buckingham Palace this evening because they've been in Northern Ireland today, and they had a rather sunny day there today, all rather blustery. It contrasts rather with what's going on in central London in the past couple of hours, where it's rather wet. But there was an important visit today where the King and the Queen Consort simply wanted to say thank you for all the good wishes that they've received, but also to recognise all the tributes from people in Northern Ireland to the late Queen and her lifelong service. So it's been a very busy day again for the King and the Queen Consort. And with me, two special guests to keep us company and to talk a little bit about the significance of this evening's events. We have Roy Anika, who's the Royal Editor of the Sunday Times, and we have Giles Brandreth, the former Member of Parliament, but better known possibly, Giles, to all of us as a broadcaster and an author and a journalist. Thank you both for joining us. A busy day in Northern Ireland. How important was it?
Very important. I mean, what's been remarkable about this whole event is it's been both global and personal and important for the whole of the United Kingdom. The Queen, who never seemed to get anything wrong, passed away in Scotland, and the new King has now visited Scotland and Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, so important to the Queen, went there I think at least 25 times, was very aware of the importance of Northern Ireland to the United Kingdom, but also very aware of the Troubles, and in a personal way too, because of course her family was affected by the Troubles. Her cousin, her husband's uncle, the present King's great uncle and mentor, Lord Mountbatten of Burma, was murdered by the IRA, and yet the Queen famously went back to Northern Ireland, shook hands with Martin McGuinness. Her belief in forgiveness, reconciliation, the importance of life without rancour. I mean, she was a remarkable person. She was the best, and as we can see, has brought out the best in all the people who are mourning her now.
Well, in the skies above RAF Northolt, we can see the Royal Air Force Globemaster, the C-17, approaching, that iconic aircraft, which of course is used by the Royal Air Force to transport troops around the world, to take supplies around the world, often humanitarian missions. Well, this is the iconic aircraft that is bringing the Queen's body back to London this evening and ready to land at RAF Northolt with a very impressive set of arrangements, as you'd expect for such a solemn occasion. For the Queen's final return to London after that very moving and very touching set of events in Edinburgh yesterday. And Roya Anika is with me as well. Just looking at these images, Roya, what we're about to see will touch the hearts of many people again, because really it's the Queen's family, because the Princess Royal is accompanying the Queen's body, and then of course some of the most senior figures in the royal household. Also with the coffin coming back, and we expect maybe the Prime Minister, the Defence Secretary to be on the ground waiting as well. So solemn, respectful, very important.
Hugely important, Hugh, because this evening we are going to see Her Majesty the Queen return to her home and the seat of monarchy. And I think when you touched on there, the Princess Royal accompanying her mother, the Queen, on her final journey back home. We have had a very, very touching statement from the Princess Royal tonight, which I think we'll be able to share a little bit later. There is something very special about her bringing her mother home. It's a very solemn evening. I think for a lot of people, we've seen all these incredible scenes in Scotland, her journey from Balmoral to Edinburgh to Holyrood House, and then of course on to St Giles's. There is going to be something that makes it even more real tonight, I think, for viewers, as they see the Queen return to England, to the seat of monarchy, where she's going to be met privately by members of the royal family. Quite a lot of the royal family actually this evening will be there to meet her coffin privately when it lies in rest tonight.
It's the moment when you see the coffin that it all comes home to you. if anybody watching, remembers their own parents' death or another family, it's you arrive at the church and you're almost sort of trying to keep the good humour going, and then you see the coffin and the reality of it dawns. And for the royal family, for the Princess Royal particularly, who yesterday travelled with her mother's body all the way from Balmoral, this must be so affecting, and it's affecting everybody. Interesting, I've been here every day at Buckingham Palace this week, and how the sense of emotion seems to be growing as the week has worn on. People feeling it more personally as time goes by.
Absorbing the news, considering what the impact of the news is, often in a personal way, because people tend to look back at their own lives, milestones in their own lives. In my case, I always think of my grandmother when I see the Queen. It's an interesting, just one of those strong triggers, if you like, in terms of my own thoughts, and I'm sure it's the same for lots of us and for lots of these people gathered outside today. We'll have the Queen's Colour Squadron, by the way, such an impressive unit, who will be providing guard of honour, and indeed the bearer party, the Queen's Colour Squadron of the Royal Air Force Regiment standing by, and the welcoming party there, which will include senior figures from the military and, as I say, the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace. And this really, for both of you, Giles and Roya, this is a journey which some might consider to be just part of a process of getting ready for the state funeral. And yet the way it's been done, the way that this has been managed, the way that there are crowds already gathered again at Buckingham Palace, just goes to show that no stage of this process is unimportant.
I think that's right. And talking about the crowds here, as I was making my way to the studio tonight, there were, this afternoon in fact, so many people gathering along the route that was published earlier today. And I think there is something incredibly poignant about the Queen, whose Platinum Jubilee we were here celebrating just 3 months ago. There's something about the image in people's minds of the Queen at Buckingham Palace. For so many of us, it's her coming out onto the balcony, and we saw her.
That balcony there.
Make that final
only 10, 11 weeks ago.
She made that amazing final appearance. We weren't sure if she was going to do it. I think there is something moving about seeing her come back to London, to her home.
And in the midst of the sadness, let's remember, it is a 96-year-old. What a life of achievement. It is just extraordinary. So while there is this personal grief, there is also a sense of celebrating a unique reign.
It's that phrase which just a member of the public who bumped into me today said, "What a life!" It's something to celebrate. Of course, it's a great loss to the family. It's a great loss to millions of people who really regarded the Queen as a rock of solidity and constancy in their lives. I don't deny that for a second. But there is an element here as well of a need to acknowledge not just a long life, but a successful life and a life of achievement.
And actually to salute a good person. There's so much bad in the world. To be able to actually say, look, we have had as our head of state somebody who is undeniably a good person. And for us to be here, this is what the Duke of Edinburgh used to call the headquarters of the family firm.
Yes.
And that she is coming home here tonight for a final night at Buckingham Palace.
I think the other important point to make here is that we are seeing all these dignitaries and the Prime Minister and other people in the military welcome her back. This is the last night the royal family have with the Queen to themselves. Tomorrow they hand her over to the nation if they're lying in state, and I think that will be a very poignant moment too for the family.
Squadron leader Brian Dunn is looking after the Guard of Honour, but of course we have Air Chief Marshal Sir Mike Wigton, who's presiding over this exercise, this very solemn exercise by the Royal Air Force. He's part of the welcoming party, and we just saw a glimpse of him a short while ago. He will be, I'm sure, greeting the Princess Royal when she emerges from the Globemaster, when it finally finishes taxiing. And then we'll see, of course, the bearer party to bring the Queen's coffin from the aircraft, the bearer party from 63 Squadron of the RAF Regiment, who will be charged with that duty, and what a privilege for them. It's a huge honour for them too.
It's interesting, every military person you meet has got a story to tell about knowing the Queen. I don't think I've met anybody over the last few days who didn't seem to know the Queen. Everybody has either seen her, met her, got a story to tell. It's wonderful. I suppose in 96 years you will have touched a lot of lives. It's interesting too that we're coming to Buckingham Palace because, of course, her favourite homes were Windsor and Balmoral. This was the official headquarters. And I know that when she became Queen back in 1952, she and the Duke of Edinburgh were thinking that maybe they could stay at Clarence House and that this could be the headquarters of the office. But Sir Winston Churchill, Prime Minister at the time, said, no, this is the place where you've got to be seen to be in command.
He had other ideas, and of course he just recognised that the symbolism of Buckingham Palace was indivisible really with the authority and the visibility of the royal family. So I think strict orders were given to move.
Yes, and it's been a royal palace since it's been a royal palace since it was Buckingham House, and was rebuilt by the architect and builder Thomas Cubitt, who by interesting coincidence was the great-great-great-grandfather of the new Queen Consort.
So this is the scene at RAF Northolt, which by the way is the oldest Royal Air Force base in the United Kingdom, with very close ties to the royal family. The Queen has been using this airbase many times over the years on her travels, and this is the point of arrival back in London, just on the outskirts of West London, on this rather solemn evening, a rather grey evening, a rather damp evening, and the guard of honour there provided by the Queen's Colour Squadron, who are waiting as they have been for about 10-15 minutes. And there we have just a glimpse there of the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, and next to him on his right the Prime Minister Liz Truss, all waiting silently and solemnly for the aircraft to come to a full stop and for the engines to be switched off, and then of course for the bearer party to carefully and very slowly and solemnly and silently bring out the coffin bearing the Queen's body. And this really is a very big moment for so many people. It's the moment when, as Giles was saying a short while ago, it's a moment when we catch a glimpse of the coffin itself, having seen it in Edinburgh, but now seeing it not in Scotland, but in England, and within a short time we'll be back in Buckingham Palace, the scene of so many happy times and happy appearances for Her Majesty over the decades.
You mentioned the weather. It's very British weather. This is a very British way of doing things. And the transition that we've seen this week shows that this extraordinary system of constitutional monarchy that we have, eccentric, arcane, unusual, but somehow it seems to have worked.
Waiting here at RAF Northolt in silence and a show of respect for the Queen's return. It's a time for us all to reflect on what this return means, and to reflect too on the richness of the Queen's life and what she's contributed over the longest reign in British history. But it's a moment that will touch so many people. It's a sense of the Queen returning home. Yes, of course, she was at home in Balmoral, but home in the sense of work has been Buckingham Palace. And that is the prime symbol of the Queen's presence in London. Station Commander just approaching the aircraft. Group Captain Taria McFadden, who's accompanied with, she's with the Princess Royal, I think, who's just emerged, that's right, from the aircraft, and Vice Admiral Timothy Lawrence. The Princess Royal, who spent quite a few days at Balmoral, and as Roya was saying just a short while ago, has been really dedicated to her mother's care. And I believe we can maybe share some of the words that she has published this evening.
That's right. Princess Royal has just issued an incredibly moving statement in which she says, "I was fortunate to share the last 24 hours of my dearest mother's life. It has been an honour and a privilege to accompany her on her final journeys. Witnessing the love and respect shown by so many on these journeys has been both humbling and uplifting." She talks about how we've been reminded of how much her presence and contribution to our national identity and how we may have taken that for granted. She talks about how she's delighted to so many people have offered understanding to her dear brother Charles as he accepts the added responsibilities of the monarch. And she says, and to my mother, the Queen, thank you. It's a very moving statement, and I think there's something about, Princess Royal bringing her mother back, how she spent that last 24 hours with her and is accompanying her on that final journey. It's a very, very moving statement from the Princess Royal.
The Princess Royal, the hardest working member of the royal family, was on Wednesday fulfilling engagements in the Scottish Islands. She was in the Isle of Skye, so she was nearby and was able to be with her mother from Wednesday night onwards, and has been with her ever since. And two people said to me this afternoon coming through Green Park, one about the King, saying he's been every inch a king. And then he said about the Princess Royal, what a wonderful daughter.
Well, the wait in silence and wait in deep respect for the Queen's coffin to be brought from the Royal Air Force aircraft by the bearer party. There we see the Air Chief Marshal, Sir Mike Wigton, just in the centre of the frame, and with the Princess Royal and her husband, Timothy Lawrence. The banner, the insignia, draped in black.
Royal salute. Present and... Stands still.
The body of Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, emerges from the Royal Air Force plane, brought by the bearer party, the Queen's Colour Squadron, 63 Squadron of the Royal Air Force Regiment.
Bearer party stands still. Bearer party in wood. Turn. Prepare to lower. Lower. Bearer party. 10 paces inward. March. Bearer party. 6 paces inwards. March. Bearer party. To feed. Feed. Bearer party, 8 paces outward, march. Bearer party, inward, turn. Wider left, quick, march.
Bearer party done its work crisply and perfectly. And the state hearse will soon be setting off for central London. Beautiful tribute that we heard from the Princess Royal to her late mother. She called the privilege of having spent the last 24 hours with her at Balmoral. The journey is underway. The party there, including, of course, representatives of the church, politics, and the military. standard of the Queen's Colour Squadron, the very powerful signal of respect because it's touching the ground, something you rarely see. The journey begins towards Buckingham Palace. It should take possibly around 40-45 minutes, but clearly it's a very slow and solemn journey. The police outriders and the Metropolitan Police clearing the way. The rain is falling. The headlamps are on already. And they leave the Royal Air Force Base at Northolt on that western approach to central London. And the Princess Royal will be joining her brother, the King, back at Buckingham Palace. And my colleague Sonali Shah has been witnessing the events there.
Hugh, as the roar of the engines shut down, the sound of the silence here was palpable. Yes, there was a small ceremony, but there was no band. It almost felt like a gentle return to London for Her Majesty. Everyone here, you could see a sense of heaviness on their faces, yes, but also there was pride that they were able to receive Her Majesty. And that's because during her time as Queen, Her Majesty visited this base on many occasions. Indeed, the Duke of Edinburgh was an honorary Air Commodore and attended many dinners here. That relationship between the military and the royal family is well known. It's here where you really feel that the strength of that relationship. Speaking to people here all afternoon, people have been telling me that they wanted to be here so they could give Her Majesty the send-off that they felt she deserved. And as the royal hearse left the airfield, I think there was a sense of calm, almost peace, that everything had gone to plan, everyone had done a good job, and they had given Her Majesty the send-off that they wanted as she departed the airfield for one final time.
Sonali, thank you very much. Sonali Shah there for us at RAF Northolt. Well, we are expecting, of course, the cavalcade to arrive here at about maybe 8 o'clock, maybe 8:05. But we'll just follow the progress that it makes, that it'll be slow, steady, respectful progress, as you'd clearly want and as you clearly expect. To look ahead to tomorrow, when we will also have another solemn event, which will involve quite a lot of ceremony, but ceremony in the sense of showing respect, showing admiration, and conveying all of the grief that people have been feeling in recent days, and giving people an opportunity to file past the coffin itself in Westminster Hall, where it'll be lying in state. Let's take a little look at the location, because this will give you a better sense of what will be going on. And there you have Buckingham Palace, with Green Park on the left-hand side, St James's Park on the right. And then on the left, as they go up the Mall, Clarence House and St James's Palace, very familiar buildings, of course, for the royal family. And then turning left towards Horse Guards and across the parade, which is the scene of many happy birthday parades, along Whitehall, past the Cenotaph, where the Queen has so diligently and with such feeling pay tribute to those lost in conflicts over many years. And then into New Palace Yard and the Palace of Westminster, and the most ancient part of the Palace of Westminster, Westminster Hall, where there will be a vigil and where there'll be a lying in state by the late monarch, with members of the public being able to queue up very patiently, we hope, because it'll be a long queue to see the coffin and to show their respects. And with me, two very special guests, Major General Christopher Geeker, Commanding Officer of the Household Division, and a predecessor of his, Major General Sir Sebastian Roberts. So they're both very expert in the field, and we're very grateful to you for coming in. It's good to have you with us. I'm just thinking about tomorrow, and it'll be a very moving scene when that procession takes place from here to Westminster Hall. What can you say to viewers about the preparations that are being made?
Well, this is one of three processions, Hugh. It takes the Queen, as you say, from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall to lie in state. It's followed by two others, a very small one from Westminster Hall to Westminster Abbey, just before the funeral, and then after the state funeral, the main procession from Westminster Abbey to Hyde Park Corner. So tomorrow is, in relative terms, one of the smaller ones, but I think it's very evocative, and it's the royal household procession taking the Queen to Westminster Hall, where she will lie in state, to give the general public an opportunity to come and pay their respects to her.
And the reason I said that lots of people will be moved is because it's not to do with the scale in that sense, it's to do with what it signifies, and there will be so many people who, I suppose, have a stake in what's going on. They'll feel a personal stake in what's going on, Sebastian.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think the soldiers and members of the bodyguard and of the Royal Company of Archers who have the honour to be there are representing not only the rest of the armed forces, but I think every monarch, providing just a little bit of physical, traditional context to focus on what is the central event, which is the lying in state of the monarch.
What I'd like to do, with your permission, is to share some images from 20 years ago, when the Queen Mother was lying in state, because this will maybe remind some people who've not seen this ceremony before, or the opportunity to come and pay one's respects. But of course, lots of people will have very deep memories of this and acute memories of it. What about your memories? Sebastian first?
I had just returned from an operation and was unable to take part myself in any of the vigils. But I was lucky enough, because the last vigil was that of the Irish Guards, because she had asked that the Irish Guards bore her coffin to her funeral. I attended in one of the small chambers that overlooks the hall, and it is one of the most moving experiences of one's life to see really the start of the final and sacramental event, which of course the funeral is. And I think everyone who files through Westminster Hall will of course have their own thoughts, but everyone, I think, must be affected by the profundity of the event.
Christopher, for you, maybe I can share the images from 1952, which I know is a long time ago, but again, they are powerful images. They show again people's determination to queue and to pay their respects to a king who died at a young age. And when we see people emerging, it's just notable that people were terribly affected by the sight of that coffin and the body lying in state. This is an integral part of the process of leading to that state funeral, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I was lucky enough to stand several vigils over the Queen Mother 20 years ago, and I was very struck by, as Sebastian says, by this incredibly powerful image in such a historic building which has seen hundreds of years of history, and then there you are being part of history being made, the public filing past, and you have the privilege of standing guard over this incredibly iconic member of the royal family. And I think it will be like that tomorrow, and it focuses one's minds on the realities of this, you know, and of the example of duty and service which the Queen has given to this country over so many years.
As we see the images of the state hearse making its way towards central London, the outriders there with the lights flashing, lots of the cars, of course, stop. They realise exactly what's going on. They know exactly what this entails, and people showing their respect in any way that they can. And for both of you gentlemen here today, representing all the traditions of the armed forces, with which of course the Queen had such a close bond, especially the Household Division, one's bound to ask the question, yes, one celebrates a long life, yes, one celebrates all that the Queen achieved, and that is a long list of achievements, but then of course there's a new monarch. And there's a new monarch with his own relationship with the armed forces and with his own relationship with people who serve. Is that transition, Sebastian first, a seamless one?
The transition is already in place.
Yes.
We will all remember the Queen while all rejoicing in the continuity that monarchy gives us. Of course, as guardsmen, we would say that. But I think whatever one's feelings for the monarch and the monarchy, I think we can all appreciate that at the same time as being a great public event, this is also an exquisitely personal one for the royal family.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that the powerful tenderness that one saw in the faces of all those young soldiers in the Royal Regiment of Scotland carrying the Queen's coffin in Edinburgh show exactly what we are about, that we are here to offer personally something on behalf of everyone at what is both a great public event and an entirely personal funeral.
Yeah, it's the state event,
Yeah.
but it's an event which touches every individual, and that's the powerful blend, I suppose, isn't it?
Yes, and I think for the armed forces, the royal family, as you say, have a very close relationship with the army, the navy, the air force. So I think for everybody, this is our last duty to the Queen, but it's also important to say it's our first duty for the King.
Yes, of course it is. I'm just following the images now as we consider the light dimming very rapidly over London as the Queen's body is brought in great formality in that state hearse with the royal standard draped over the coffin, one floral tribute, and just thinking about the person following in the vehicle, the Princess Royal, who's really been with Her Majesty for the last few days of her life and clearly played a very important part in terms of giving her comfort and being a constant presence there. And one must spare more than a thought for what she's going through at this point.
At any funeral, any prayer for the dead is also a prayer for the comfort of their family. And I'm sure that the millions of people who will be watching this, the tens of thousands who file past over the next few days, past the catafalque in Westminster Hall, will all be not only mourning themselves, not only thinking about she who has gone, but also of those who remain, and most essentially the King and the rest of her family. It's deeply human in us.
Yes, I think that's true, and I think that the sense of duty and continuity that the entire royal family have shown over the last few years, but in particular now, has earned them the respect, certainly the armed forces and more broadly the nation. And of course they're a family who are grieving.
Yes.
And I think having to fulfil that double function of very public face of the nation, but also a family grieving, is tremendously difficult. But I think people realise that. And it's a very powerful scene.
Major General Christopher Geeker, we know that you have a lot of responsibility on your shoulders, and we hope it goes well for you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. And Major General Sir Sebastian Roberts, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you very much for sharing your views with us as well. So the cortege is making its way towards Buckingham Palace. It's making steady progress, and once it arrives at the palace, the Queen's body will be at rest in what's called the Bow Room, which is one of those rooms overlooking the gardens. It's a bright, light room in daytime, and it's a room that is normally used by the monarch, and the Queen used to use it very frequently when she was welcoming foreign leaders or having lunch with some foreign leaders. So it's a room that the Queen would have known very well, and that is where the coffin will be left overnight. And then tomorrow afternoon will be the procession that we've been talking about with our two military guests just now. And that will make its way from Buckingham Palace along the Mall over to Horse Guards Parade and along Whitehall, steadily down to Parliament Square, into New Palace Yard, and then it will be welcomed by religious leaders at Westminster Hall. There will be a short service, and then there'll be close members of the royal family in attendance, and they will be observing silence and a short vigil. Parliamentarians will be looking for their opportunity to file past, given that this is all happening in the Palace of Westminster, in the most ancient part of the palace. And then the members of the public who've been queuing, some of them we think within a few days will have been queuing for 24 hours, possibly more. Judging by the response already and people's determination to show respect and to show affection and to show their grief, but to show their gratitude as well, for all those reasons. And the sense of saying goodbye to a monarch who's served the longest period in the history of the monarchy in these islands. It is a remarkable thing, and people want to be part of that story, understandably. So that's what's coming up in the next few days, and the lying in state will be going on day and night until 6:30 on Monday morning, and that is the day, of course, of the state funeral itself, when again we expect an event on a scale that most people haven't seen before, certainly in the United Kingdom. The Queen Mother's funeral was, of course, a major and an important event, as was the funeral of the Princess of Wales. But this is the funeral of a monarch. It's different, and the scale will be different, and the effect on people, judging by what we've seen so far, will be different. So as we stay with these images and as we follow the state hearse on its way to central London, let me introduce my guests as we look at the images. We have India Hicks, who's kindly joined us. We have Claire Balding, who's kindly joined us, and we have Robert Hardman, the writer and the author and the Daily Mail journalist. All of you, a very warm welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us. If you don't mind, Claire, I'm going to start with you because of your long-standing links to the royal family, which manifest themselves in different ways, not least with horse racing, but because you've known the Queen and met her in different contexts. And for lots of viewers, it's always a thrill to be able to understand what the personality is and what the passions are. And for those tonight watching these images, which of course are solemn and sad images, what can you say to counterbalance a little and tell us about this remarkable woman?
I think you've talked a lot about what the Queen has given in her official capacity and that sense of duty and extraordinary hard work and the hours and the days and the months and the years, the decades put into the role of being Queen. But away from that, when given the opportunity to indulge, if you like, in a passion, those passions were horses and dogs. And yes, the racing, the horse racing was the thing that she shared with the public, and it's quite difficult for any monarch to share a passion with a huge number of people, because normally passion is something you do on the quiet. You know, you have your interests and you can't necessarily, you know, share that in front of a crowd. But with racing, an extraordinary wide variety of people are involved in the sport, and the Queen loved to come to the stables in particular, to be there early in the morning to see the horses on the gallops, or to be there for evening stables, to talk to all of the grooms. And that was true whether it was racing stables and looking at, you know, the Olympic athletes of the equine world, or with Highland and Fell ponies up at Balmoral, or obviously with the horses at the Royal Mews at Windsor, and also loved her dogs.
Yes, clearly, in all of the lovely archive material we've been showing, there are dogs everywhere. The corgis are everywhere. The dorgies as well are everywhere. And judging by the response from viewers, I have to say, they like the dogs as much as they do the horses. It's a nice thing.
And that scene, the famous scene, obviously with Daniel Craig, that was shown at the opening of London 2012 Olympics, when the corgis lead the way down the corridor, that is what happened. You know, they would lead the way. They knew exactly where they were going. They knew what time they were doing it. They, you know, were right around, playing with toys along the way. And to see the Queen laughing and smiling because there was a shared experience, that everybody was looking at something else, not at her, and she was part of the crowd. And I think that's why racing for her was such a wonderful thing to be able to enjoy. And she was a very, very successful breeder and owner, and loved that scene. You know, she liked to talk about horses and about animal behaviour, and was really visionary actually in the way she thought about it, always introducing new ideas. I'm not sure whether any of the dog training ideas will have worked, because corgis are notoriously naughty.
India, your mother, Lady Pamela, of course, is lady in waiting to the Queen. And you indeed have your own links to the royal family. I'm thinking about you being a bridesmaid back in 81 at the Charles and Diana wedding. When people ask you about an event like this, when you think about what this represents, you think about people, thousands of them behind us, wanting to show their respect. What is it about the Queen's contribution that you think really touches people? Is it the fact that she just had a sense of duty that was unshakable? Because many people saw her slightly aloof. The great thing about what Claire's saying is it's building up a portrait of a personality and a character. What is the Queen's quality, the magic that brings people out in their thousands like this?
I think that she was so exceptional in the way she came to the job, so young. She made a promise that she kept. She never put a foot wrong. She was wise in so many ways, breeding, normal everyday life. She just set an example that none of us have seen, or probably will see again, because she had so much time to finesse the role. But she just was able to bridge being a monarch, being a mother, being a grandmother with ease. And I think her faith was an incredible part of what made her so exceptional as well, and very open with that and very accepting. And I think that made us all feel very hugely impressed by this woman for so many years.
Robert, we were looking yesterday at that wonderful service of thanksgiving and reflection in Edinburgh. And of course, now we're seeing these images of the Queen's body being brought back from Scotland to London. When we talk about qualities, you've written a lot about the late Queen. When we talk about qualities, what are the ones that come to the fore that really do connect with people more than someone is a monarch and they must be respected because they're a monarch, but the personal qualities that manifested themselves in a way that they connected with people?
Well, Hugh, I think we always hear about her sense of duty and service, and that goes without saying. But I think Claire touched on it there. That the way that we all feel we can relate to her in some way. I think the Prince of Wales touched on that just behind us here at Buckingham Palace at the time of the Platinum Jubilee, when he said that the story of her life is the story of all our lives. Everything about her life, it sort of punctuates all our lives. We remember where we were at the Silver Jubilee or at the Royal Wedding in 1981 or the Golden Jubilee or whatever. She's just touches us in so many different ways, and that's reflected now in these extraordinary scenes. I mean, this isn't even meant to be this is what they call an operational homecoming. This isn't even meant to be any sort of official event, and yet you've got the whole of West London grinding to a halt. You've got people stopping on their way home from work, just parking their cars in the fast lane, crossing the central reservation, just to say they saw her passing by.
That's right.
These are extraordinary scenes. I've just come down from Edinburgh, and the scenes there, the Royal Mile, day after day, absolutely packed. Incredibly good-natured, well-behaved, very affectionate, but deeply respectful. And it just goes to the heart of what this extraordinary monarch meant to absolutely everybody.
India, you made the point about bridging communities, and I think the other thing the Queen has done, and as she makes her last journey back into the capital city, she has bridged the rural community with the city. And so much of her involvement in horses and indeed dogs kept her in the countryside, kept her connected to country people. And at her heart, that's what she was.
Well, we were also mentioning earlier how brilliant the ending has been, that she was there in Scotland, which is where her heart was and really where she wanted to die, and she managed it. Incredible. And that bridges again England and Scotland. It's unifying for all of us. We see the countries coming together. This
has been, for some people, I have to say, a sensitive topic, which was, did the Queen somehow foresee that her time was short and made a decision that maybe she did want to be in Balmoral when the end came? And some people have been responding rather well, in a rather hurt way to that there was this element of planning in that way. However, I think we can say, Robert, that what's happened in the days since the death at Balmoral has been something that the Queen surely would have appreciated and applauded.
I think absolutely, Hugh. I'm sure she would have been very touched by it. I do think it's rather wonderful that, in life, she was absolutely famous for keeping her views to herself, as she had to as a constitutional monarch. We never really knew, and now here we are still guessing about what was really going through her mind up at Balmoral. But I mean, the fact that she is the first British monarch in history to have passed away in Scotland meant that all these extraordinary scenes we've been lucky enough to see in the last few days have unfolded. They didn't happen for George VI, who died at Sandringham. George V died at Sandringham. Victoria died at Osborne House. But because the Queen died in Scotland, Scotland has played its part, and it's played its part magnificently. I mean, the scenery, the landscape, I think it's glorious that in the space of just a couple of days we've seen everything from those stupendous scenes of Deeside and the sunshine and the tractors and the ponies, and here we are now in John Betjeman's Metroland on a rainy workaday evening, watching probably millions of people turning out in Grotty, and I can say Grotty because I live in it, West London. It just goes to the heart of that she was a queen for everybody of a united kingdom, and that kingdom has never been more united in a very long time.
And do you agree with that?
Completely, and I think this probably helps the family, her immediate family go through these very, very difficult days, particularly, obviously, our king and his queen, who must be feeling enormous grief and sorrow. And yet, with all of this pageantry, the process of all of that probably helps them. I mean, can you imagine inheriting this job at the age King Charles is,
yes,
and having to have the energy this week to take on all of this whilst grieving your mother?
I mean, I have to say that he's seemed really energetic. He's looked very well. He's spoken with great eloquence and feeling, and I think he's touched a lot of people.
And as he said to a member of the public who said, you're doing so well, he said it's what they call duty.
Duty, yes.
And there, in that word, we understand everything the Queen represented, everything the role as monarch represents, and everything he understands it to be. And while we were united in joy in the summer when we were here for the Platinum Jubilee and we saw the light show above Buckingham Palace, now everyone here on a dark, rainy evening, united in grief and respect.
The broadcast that he made on the day after the Queen's death, that was remarkable. It was remarkable for the controlled emotion of it, the eloquence, and the power of the message, because clearly a lot of thought had gone into that, and you felt very strongly this wasn't something that had been written by officials. This was Charles speaking.
I mean, he's obviously given so much thought to this, and very correctly, he never gave voice to those thoughts while the Queen was alive. He thought it was just disrespectful and inappropriate. So everyone might speculate on what sort of a king is Charles going to be. We always heard, well, he wasn't going to tell us until the time came because it was wrong to do so. And suddenly now he's king, and we've seen this reign begin at pace. The way he has been touring the Union, making sure he's going to all corners of the kingdom, Wales still to come, of course, and just taking this message, this is one kingdom, this is a united kingdom, I am your monarch, but there's a humility there, and as you say, Hugh, great choice of words. I mean, he's been a lot of sort of poetry. I mean, the wonderful, may flights of angels sing thee to thy rest. And gosh, that was strong. But quoting Robbie Burns in Scotland, I mean, he really, I think, has just captured the mood, and very reassuring. It's very important for monarchy to reassure people in times of great crisis and turmoil, and we are in one, as we say goodbye to our Queen, and yet he has definitely stepped up to the plate, I think.
When we see, and we expect it to be, by the end of the 4 days, millions of people eager to come to show their respects, eager to file past the coffin, there'll be scenes that we've just not had the opportunity to see in the United Kingdom for a long time. Do you think that will change in some way the way that people view the institution of monarchy? Is the whole process that we're seeing now and the attempt to slowly modernise parts of it, which Charles has been clearly planning to do for quite a long time, is this process of grieving for the longest serving Queen in our history, longest serving monarch in our history, is that process going to lead to people being able to look in a different way at what the monarchy is, or is that asking too much?
I would imagine that this grieving period demonstrates again the power of the Queen's reign. But looking forward, I think Charles will reign in his own way, because he is a very different man, obviously, and he's the son of his mother, but he has his own ideas and interests, and he has a very strong woman beside him. So I think we're in very capable hands. Of course, change is always alarming, particularly when we've had such a strong example. But I think that the four that are there, Charles and Camilla and his son William and Catherine, are a very strong unit and a modern unit. And so I think that the future is bright. I really do.
And one of the things they have already, and the Queen did as well, have embraced, is technology. And we will see as the vehicles make their way into central London, coming on the Westway now, you will see, as we have seen in London for the last few days, all of the advertising, all of the electronic advertising boards showing images of the Queen.
Yes.
And that again amplifies the message. Technology can do that in a way that wasn't possible 70 years ago. And that's one of the huge adaptations. And even COVID obviously then necessitated the use of Zoom. It is something that, or any other device,
Yes.
you were able to connect with. For example, if you wanted to talk to school children, you could suddenly talk to 1 million school children rather than 20. And that is something I think King Charles will be very keen to make the most of.
Well, let's take a look at Buckingham Palace and the scene here on this rather wet evening. But you can just about make out the crowds who are around the Queen Victoria Memorial there, which dominates the circle in front of the palace itself. The palace is lit, and of course we now know that the King is in residence in Buckingham Palace. He'll be joined very soon by the Princess Royal when the state hearse arrives back at Buckingham Palace. Well, if they're on the Westway, and Claire correctly spotted where they were.
They've just come off at Paddington, I think, haven't they?
That's right, so there's not long to go. No. So why don't we just pop outside, and my colleague Clive Myrie is on the Mall with some of the people waiting there. Clive?
Hugh, the nights are drawing in a little quicker now, aren't they? And for the thousands of people who are here all the way down the Mall behind me, to my left, to my right, all the way up to the gates of Buckingham Palace. Many of them, they've been here so long, they will have seen daylight turn to twilight and now to nighttime as they await the arrival of the Queen's coffin. I have to say that despite the fact that there are so many people here, it is really quiet. There is a hush. People are huddled together underneath their umbrellas trying to keep the chill off. But there is a hush, there's a stillness, there's a solemnity here as the Queen makes her final journey to her old home. And I just wonder, given all the pageantry that we've seen over the last few days, the ceremonial I's that have been dotted and the T's that have been crossed, if this will be a moment for these people where it actually hits home that the Queen is no longer with them. The thousands of flowers that have been left here over the last few days, they've been moved to nearby Green Park, and every one of those bouquets represents an individual, a person, a family paying their own respects to the departed monarch. And it has to be said, and we need to remember this, tonight is the last night that the Queen's closest, her family, will have her to herself, to themselves, because tomorrow she will be back with the people.
Clive, many thanks. Well, progress is being made, and even on a dark, wet evening like this, the progress has been very neat and impressive, and they're approaching the very familiar parts of central London around Hyde Park and Park Lane, and making their way down towards Wellington Arch, which will feature prominently in the state funeral when it happens on Monday. And these streets, these great landmarks here in central London near Buckingham Palace, of course all of them familiar to the Queen from her childhood. And she was born just a few yards away from here in Mayfair, in Bruton Street, which was the home of her grandparents, her maternal grandparents. Before, of course, the turmoil came later in life when her father suddenly was obliged to take the throne after his brother decided to abdicate. It was a trauma at the time, I don't think it's too strong a word, and the life of the family was turned upside down. And George VI was greatly loved by people for the way that he stepped up despite his rather fragile health, and the Queen never forgot that. And I always find it rather moving that people write about the Queen's devotion to her father and the way that she ruled, the way that she reigned, all of it in line with what he had taught her. That was the example that she wanted to emulate. And I find that the strength of that bond, which clearly went on for decades after George VI's death, that she was still reigning in line with the principles that he'd transferred. And there's something very moving about that. So they're within reach, I think, and there's an expectation here in the crowd. Lots of umbrellas out, I have to say, and can't blame people for that. It's not raining as heavily as it was earlier, but there's a vast crowd now gathered outside Buckingham Palace, and I'm just sensing a silence. I'm sensing an air of expectation, the solemnity. There's a tranquility to it, which is something you're not used to. I think we all know this, Robert, don't we, when we're normally here for the birthday parade or an event of celebration.
Or just changing the guard. I mean,
Yes.
you know, there's always a sense of sort of excitement, anticipation, commotion, and now there is this great solemnity. I think it's very touching. The Queen's coffin is just about, you mentioned her birthplace at Bruton Street, just up the road, and now that she's just going past the corner of Piccadilly where she grew up as a child, a home she loved, they all loved, the home they didn't really want to leave when it was time to move to Buckingham Palace, where of course she's about to arrive now.
My mother remembers early on when they had just taken on the role and they moved into Buckingham Palace, and she remembers coming here to the gardens where the Queen and Princess Margaret, my mother and her sister, would play horses. And the Queen was always the rider. Princess Margaret was always the horse. And she did also remember very early on when they went to see one of the films that Noel Coward was producing. It was based on my grandfather's war story of HMS Kelly, and they were on their way for an official screening, and my mother was in the car with the King and Queen, the two princesses, and Princess Elizabeth said to her younger sister, "Wave, you must wave at the crowd." So from a very early age, she was that person. She was the one to lead.
Yeah. Well, that leadership manifested itself very clearly over a very long reign. Leadership often given in a very subtle way, in a very understated way. But one got the impression time and again that when a decision was made, that decision was very clear and was conveyed in a very firm way. It had been thought through, it was measured, but it was delivered and taken in a sometimes forceful way, but always a determined way. Here we have the flashing lights and the outriders approaching, I think, quite close to Marble Arch, unless they're now drawing down towards Wellington Arch. The crowd's building up, so getting closer and closer to Buckingham Palace itself.
It's remarkable, isn't it, the great variety of the British weather. We had the rainbows on Thursday, we had the sunshine in Edinburgh this morning and yesterday, and in the rain those lights just sparkling because of the weather, and even more brightly one can see that, specially designed. And again, the visibility, even in death we can see the Royal Standard, we can see the Queen, we can see the coffin.
She would always make a point, as even driving at night, when she must have been terribly tired after some state occasion, she would always make sure the light was on in the car, not because she was a show-off at all, it's because she knew people had come out, they expected to see her. Visibility, I have to be seen to be believed.
It's the ancient tradition of monarchy, which is that you have to be seen.
And therefore the bright colours worn at Royal Ascot, for example, or at any attributing the colour at any official event.
It's extraordinary to think how much the world has changed in all terms. You were talking about technology. Again, I keep referencing my mother because she really is the one who was there so close to the Queen, especially when that moment she actually became Queen. And they needed to make their way back to England, and the world's press had already descended on Nairobi Airport by the time the then Princess Elizabeth arrived. And the world's press put their cameras on the floor, on the ground, as a sign of respect for the Queen in mourning, and no one took a photograph of her. Imagine now.
Well, I rather wish, I have to say, that tradition were being followed now, because I do think that there must be a respect. And it's not to blame people. I think so many people now have grown up with an iPhone attached to their hand, and that filming something makes it real. No, witnessing makes it real.
Well, I have to say in Edinburgh it was very firmly laid down there will be no iPhones and photography at the vigil at the Lying in State, and I'm sure that'll be the same here.
And it was adhered to very
Oh yes,
faithfully.
I mean, everybody.
There was no
everyone behaved
issue at all.
impeccably. Yes.
No.
Just coming down Park Lane, coming up to Hyde Park Corner, I think.
So we can see a big police presence there as we come to the southern end of Park Lane, and very soon they'll be turning over to the left and then on the approach to Constitution Hill, the way down to the palace itself. Journey the Queen made probably thousands of times in her long life. And as we wait for the state hearse to come onto the final approach here to Buckingham Palace, we just reflect as well on the fact that we have family members inside the palace who are waiting. They're waiting for the arrival principally of their mother's body. This is Charles and Anne. Not sure, Robert, at this point where Duke of York or Earl of Wessex are, whether they're there as well. They may well be.
I think during the course of the evening, this is the family's last chance to have that private farewell. We would expect the family, obviously, to stand vigil in Westminster Hall, but tonight is the nearest. And here, of course, they're now in, I suppose, what you would call the home straight.
The final furlong. And the Princess Royal obviously following behind. And that was a very moving statement, wasn't it, that was released from the Princess Royal at 7 o'clock?
Yes, heartfelt and timed in a very deliberate way for the return to London. Princess Royal waited. Here at Buckingham Palace, the outriders have just gone past. And there's silence here as the state hearse approaches. And Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, turns to Buckingham Palace one last time. the final return to Buckingham Palace. The coffin of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has been brought back from Scotland, from Balmoral, flown from Edinburgh to London, driven from RAF Northolt to Buckingham Palace, where it will lie at rest overnight in the bow room of the palace, and then tomorrow afternoon will be taken in a formal procession, a state procession, from the palace to Westminster Hall, in the ancient precincts of the Palace of Westminster, where a body will lie in state for 4 days and nights until the state funeral takes place on Monday. And the vast crowd here, which has waited patiently in the rain and in the wind, rain has just about held off now, some people beginning to disperse, but lots of people cheering when the state hearse arrived. They just wanted to show their appreciation and their admiration. So while some stood in silence, others wanted to express a different emotion. And that is the nature of the event. That's the nature of what is going on. It's a mix of sadness, and it's a mix of gratitude and celebration too. So that is the scene at 8:07 at Buckingham Palace. The King and the Queen Consort, other members of the royal family, are inside, and they are there to welcome back the body of Queen Elizabeth II, which will lie at rest overnight in their official residence in London. And there have been so many tributes published since the Queen's death that most of them from people, of course, who never met Her Majesty, and yet demonstrating the profound effect that she had on people's lives. But some of the most illuminating tributes, I have to say, including the Princess Royal tonight, have come from members of the Queen's close family, including her children.
There are various things that the Queen's managed to achieve over all those years. I think probably providing the stability and the continuity over that length of time has been, I think, an immensely important part of in a sense, what she's achieved.
There are so many different things that she contributed to, being head of the Commonwealth for so many years and helping to maintain its integrity. Her position helped, I think, so much to cement what is a truly astonishing association. And we've talked a lot, my mama and I, so that's always been a great help to me, to hear her perspective on what goes on.
I think the example that she had from her father, as well as her mother, was absolutely crucial to her understanding of what being a monarch actually meant. And it was really about service and her definition of service. And that was a lifetime, literally 24/7, 365 days of the year.
The job is about being interested in people, and the Queen had this extraordinary ability always to make you feel that you are the only person.
We didn't see much of her during the day because of the duties, but in the evening, just the same as any other family, we would get together. I always remember holidays being very, very special.
There was a lot going on in those periods, partly because it included all the things that she enjoyed, and that included the countryside, the dogs, the horses, and just being out and about, and being able to get away a bit from that public gaze.
One of the greatest achievements I felt personally was her and my father's visit to Ireland.
Uachtaráin agus a coide.
Coming, at the end of so many years, and after so much hurt and pain and difficulty was a wonderfully healing, reconciling moment, which I think had a profound effect. I think more than anything else, you learn by example. For her, whatever she felt, or ever ill, or ever difficult or exhausted, she always went out and did what was required, and that does rub off, I think, and I shall never forget being with her, on those marvellous occasions. All those moments are so special.
As I was saying, some of the most illuminating tributes come from the close family, because of course it's not just a different perspective, but especially in the case of people who we don't hear from very often talking about the Queen in those terms. So it was just a very moving experience to be able to share some of those views. I'm joined by two more special guests, and I'm very grateful to them for coming on a night like this. We're joined by Baroness Scotland, thank you so much for coming in, and by the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for coming in, good to see you. Baroness Scotland, we've discussed in previous programmes, in happy times and less happy times, how you've engaged with the royal family, not least to do with Commonwealth. What does the Queen's death mean in terms of the way the Commonwealth sees itself? Because clearly, for so long, she was the undisputed figurehead. So what does this change represent?
Well, I think it's a very poignant moment for absolutely everyone. The whole Commonwealth is devastated. We in the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland tend to think of her as our Queen. But she wasn't just our Queen and the Queen of the realms. She was actually the Queen of the whole world. If you spoke about the Queen, everybody knew you were talking about Queen Elizabeth II.
Yeah.
And the truth is, she has been almost omnipresent in the world's life for 70 years. First when she was a beautiful and engaging young woman before she got married, then this magical marriage with Prince Philip, and then this extraordinary young woman at 25 became our Queen. And the total dedication that she has given her whole life. Do you remember when she was 21, when she said, "It doesn't matter whether my life is going to be long or short, I will dedicate every day to your service." And that's what she did. So I think the whole Commonwealth is grieving, but also expressing love and devotion and appreciation and huge sympathy for King Charles. He has been with her on this journey for the Commonwealth. He was chosen by all the leaders in 2018 to be the next head of the Commonwealth. In part, I think, because he had emulated her love and affection, her devotion and her duty. So I think there is so much pain, but also gladness and appreciation and respect.
The word duty is important, isn't it? And Sir Lindsay, in the very, I thought, dignified and touching event that was organised in Parliament, Westminster Hall, when you conveyed condolences of your fellow parliamentarians, and we can see some of the images here of the event itself. You were very clear in what you thought the Queen had brought to the role. What would you say to viewers tonight?
I've got to say, and everybody will say the same, we knew no one else. She has been all of my lifetime. It is the lifetime of the people I represent within Chorley. And of course, it was that bringing together. Grief brings unity, but none more so than what Queen Elizabeth did to this. Not just the United Kingdom, the overseas territories and crown dependencies. This is about the world coming together, the Commonwealth, with all at one. The grief is shared, and nobody could ever have thought. And we've watched her grow old, but there's always been that smile, that happiness, that radiance that came out right from, you think the silver smile from the Jubilee, right through to the platinum smile at the end. You never thought this would end, but all good things do come to an end. And I've got to say, if nothing else, it's brought us all together, and that's got to be a good thing. Out of bad must come good, and I think we've got it. We've got a new king, and the country are looking for leadership, and we will get that leadership. That's the one thing I'm absolutely sure of.
That's a very clear and positive message. Given that the role of the monarch in the system we have is sometimes a cause for debate. The issue with the Queen, I think, is that people felt that she'd really managed that very skillfully. And the hope is, of course, that will then continue. I'm assuming that hope is shared very fervently.
It's got to be seamless, hasn't it? The transfer will be seamless. We've already seen that. The dignity that's already been shown. But the respect that came from both houses was very, very clear. Here is a new king. And I've got to say, without doubt, when I was speaking to peers and to MPs and everybody around, this brought us together. And there is great belief in the future. And I think, in fairness, this is a king who has decided to set out from day one to make sure the appeal's there, to reflect to everybody what his views and how we will do this job. He has stepped up. But I've got to say, it must have been the longest apprenticeship in history.
Yes.
So, no, he's got it right.
Yes.
He's absolutely nailed it well. And it's that feeling that, yes, the sadness is there, we've lost our queen, but we've now got a king. And like everything, it will move on. And we've seen that dignity already. And we will see more of that as he goes around the United Kingdom. And it goes around the Commonwealth at some point. This is a clear message. He is here to stay, and we will be well represented. That I am absolutely sure of.
You share that optimism?
I do, absolutely. I think Lindsay has said it very, very well, because the Queen is irreplaceable. She is one in 1,000 years, not just in 70. But look at what she left us and the dignity that she's shown. You spoke earlier, Hugh, about the fact that she learnt at her father's knee, and she emulated him and respected him and loved him. But look at what has happened with King Charles. He too has learnt at his mother's knee. She has been with him for this whole 73 years, a major influence in his life. And he has suffered a huge loss. We're all grieving now because the Queen was in our drawing room, she was on the television, we looked forward for her every Christmas message. But he had her every day of his life. So I think this is a huge continuity, and they say the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree, and he had two great parents, because Prince Philip was a remarkable man, and our beloved late Queen was an extraordinary woman.
Thank you so much, both of you. Baroness Scotland, Sir Lindsay Hall, and Mr. Speaker, good to have you with us. Thank you very much. Well, we mentioned, of course, the event there at Westminster Hall, but of course today's been a very busy day because the King and the Queen Consort were visiting Northern Ireland. So let's join my colleague Mark Simpson, who's there for us tonight.
Today has been a day when Northern Ireland has looked forward and it's also looked back. You can maybe see people still here behind me at Hillsborough Castle paying tribute to the Queen. But earlier today they were here to welcome the new King, and someone who was there inside the castle to greet him was Lady Myrie Peters, an Olympic gold medalist 50 years ago, also Lady of the Garter. In that capacity, you knew the Queen, you know the King, a day today of mixed emotions.
Absolutely. The people who were here this morning to receive the King, the new King, we knew when the 21 gun salute went over, and then he greeted us all in the castle grounds. And then we were taken to the cathedral, where there was a very reflective service of remembrance for Her Majesty, and it was very moving and emotional.
Yes, that service at St Anne's Cathedral, Protestant clergy, Catholic clergy together, a message of reconciliation, just as the Queen would have wanted.
Absolutely, and the Primate of all Ireland, the Archbishop of Armagh, in his sermon talked about reconciliation, and of course that's what the Queen did when she came and crossed the border and spoke in Gaelic at the reception.
I mentioned you're a Lady of the Garter. You got to know the Queen. How will you remember her?
With great love and affection, and she was always made you feel very special, and yet she was the special one.
And you know the new King as well?
I have met him on a number of occasions, and I got to shake his hand today and express my sympathy for the loss of his mother.
And whenever you saw him arrive and the royal standard go up here at Hillsborough Castle, I suppose you reflected on the many times, more than 20 times, that the Queen came here.
Absolutely, and she loved coming to Northern Ireland, and I was privileged when I was made the Lady of the Garter to have a private audience with her, and that was amazing because she knew so much about what was happening at that time in Northern Ireland and showed her love and affection for this area.
Lady Myrie Peters, a day of mixed emotions for you and for everyone here in Northern Ireland. Thank you very much indeed.
Mark, thank you very much, and of course Myrie Peters as well, very special guest to be talking to us tonight. Well, let's rejoin Clive, who's on the Mall, with someone who has a very important role in tomorrow's procession. Let's join them.
Hugh, yes, very important. I'm with Captain Amy Cooper, the officer in command of the gun carriage that will be carrying the coffin of the Queen from here on the way to Westminster Hall. Thank you so much for joining us and for staying out here in the rain. First of all, that is a heavy responsibility that you have. When you were told you would be dealing with that, what were your thoughts?
I felt instantly extremely privileged, proud, and so lucky to be able to pay this final tribute to Her Majesty the Queen in this way.
And seeing all these people here tonight and those that will be lining the route tomorrow, what are your thoughts about that?
I think it's a testament to how well loved she was by all of the public, all of the United Kingdom and all of the world. I'm sure will be watching. It's testament to her selfless 70 years of service to the country. What are your own thoughts on the eve of that procession? Are you nervous? I am nervous, but I am well prepared and well rehearsed. And I just want to be able to do my very best, be professional, be dignified on this sombre occasion, and make sure that I do my regiment proud. Indeed, I'm sure you will. Captain Amy Cooper, thanks very much indeed for that. Something like 350,000 people are expected to file past the Queen's coffin when it lies in state at Westminster Hall. And I remember myself filing past the body of Nelson Mandela back in 2013. I thought I knew how I would feel. And I ended up realizing that within that coffin was flesh and bone. The spirit of the person wasn't there. And I just wonder if that might be the overriding thought tomorrow when those people file past the body of Her Majesty.
Indeed, Clive, thank you very much. Clive Myrie there, and obviously one of many people with him who will have a very big role tomorrow, but also on the state funeral on Monday. The historian Anna Kay is with me, and Robert Hardman's back. Thank you, Anna. Nice to see you, and welcome back, Robert. I think you are born in Scotland and the Highlands.
Yes.
So the Scottish angle and the Balmoral angle is one that you will have really felt very strongly in recent days. How have you been reflecting on the way that has featured in these great events?
Well, it was kind of wonderful in the end that she died in Scotland. I mean, we know that she loved it, but also sometimes it can feel a bit like everything is in Westminster and everything else is peripheral. And that isn't how our nation is, and I don't suppose that's how the Queen saw it either. So it was, I thought, a very kind of fortuitous sort of inversion of the normal order of things, and you know, gave an opportunity actually for her to lie in state in Scotland first, which I think was actually wonderful.
I did want to talk to you as well, and I'll talk to Robert too, about what we're likely to see with the lying in state, because clearly that's the next very big stage of this process of preparing for the state funeral. And your expertise as well in terms of crown jewels, and we've discussed them on programmes in the past. When the lying in state occurs, as we understand it, there will be the imperial state crown laid on the coffin, and the orb, and the sceptre. Yes, what do they represent?
So they are the emblems of the regalia that most completely embody monarchy. And the point about them is, of course, that those were the symbols with which the Queen was invested when she was crowned, and they're the symbols which will again be used when we have the next coronation. So they represent, if you like, there's been a lot of talk about continuity, hasn't there, in the kind of emotional sense, but those represent the kind of constitutional continuity, if you like, and the sort of passing of the baton, if you like, from sovereign to sovereign. And of course, that, you know, those objects have been used since the 1660s, since the Civil War, when the original medieval collection was melted down. So they do, you know, they do in a very kind of real sense embody that tremendous continuity, and you know, the shapes, the emblems, the symbols, the globe representing the globe and the cross representing Christ's Majesty and so on, are all you know, are all address, if you like, the different ingredients of ancient monarchy.
Robert, lots of viewers ask us about planning. They ask us in a respectful way how much planning has gone into what we've seen over the last few days. Was there a plan in place, for example, if the Queen died in Scotland, the plans for the next 4 or 5 days with the lying in state and the state funeral? What would your answer to viewers be?
Well, Hugh, of course, this has been planned for many years, and in for many possible outcomes. I mean, we didn't know, obviously, where Her Majesty would pass away, but the fact that she is the first British monarch, indeed, in history to pass away in Scotland, meant that Operation Unicorn, which was the Scottish element of this, was inaugurated. And hasn't it been absolutely extraordinary and touching and beautiful? I'm sure it's exactly what she would have wanted. I keep getting this sense of, I mean, what a farewell journey to think it's set out in a sunny Sunday morning from Balmoral, you know, with little crowds in little villages, and it's gone through every sort of manifestation of Britain, and here we are in the rain, and you know, this I mean, it's extraordinary to think this what they call operational movement tonight from RAF Northolt wasn't even officially a thing. It was just a movement. I mean, it looks like a sort of, you know, a very serious state occasion. What's it going to be like tomorrow? That's what we really ask ourselves.
We'll see, and we'll talk again. Thank you both very much. Join us again at 1 o'clock tomorrow for that formal procession from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall. And as Robert says, it promises to be a solemn spectacle which will live long in the memories of all who see it. It's a journey made many times by the late Queen, ever since she was a young princess. Goodbye.